Steven Seagal boarded the plane quietly, without cameras, assistants, or special treatment. He wore simple clothes, nothing flashy, nothing that screamed celebrity. To most people, he looked like an ordinary older man traveling alone. He checked his boarding pass, walked down the aisle, and calmly sat in his VIP seat by the window. No drama. No attitude. For a moment, everything felt normal. Then a flight attendant stopped beside him. "Excuse me, sir," she said, forcing a polite smile. "There seems to be a small issue with your seat." Steven looked up calmly. "An issue?" "Yes," she replied. "We'll need you to step out for a moment." Nearby passengers glanced over. Steven stood up slowly, not wanting to cause a scene. "What seems to be the problem?" he asked. The attendant lowered her voice. "A very important passenger has just arrived. This seat is needed." Steven glanced at his boarding pass again. Everything was correct. "I paid for this seat," he said gently. "Is there a mistake in the system?" She hesitated, not checking the system, not checking his ticket, just looking at him. This is how unfair treatment usually begins. Not loudly, not aggressively, but with quiet assumptions and polite disrespect. A well-dressed man appeared behind the attendant. Expensive suit, confident posture, impatience written all over his face. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence alone explained everything. The attendant turned back to Steven. "Sir, please cooperate. We don't want to delay the flight." Steven felt the eyes of the cabin on him now. He remained calm. "I'm happy to cooperate," he said. "But I'd like to understand why I'm being asked to move." She didn't answer. "Before this goes any further, where are you watching from? Comment your country and city below." The silence grew uncomfortable. Steven noticed something important. No one had checked his ticket. No one had explained the rule. The decision had already been made. Sometimes people don't remove you because you're wrong. They remove you because someone more important wants your place. Steven looked around the cabin. Some passengers looked away. Others watched closely. A few had already taken out their phones. He took a slow breath. "May I ask," he said calmly, "would this be happening if I looked different?" The question hung in the air. Have you ever been judged just by how you look? Type yes or no in the comments. The flight attendant stiffened. And that's when Steven realized. This was no longer just about a seat. It was about respect. And what happened next shocked everyone on board. The flight attendant shifted her weight, clearly uncomfortable now that Steven wasn't immediately backing down. "Sir," she said again, this time firmer, "we really need you to step aside." Steven didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He simply asked, "Can you explain why?" She glanced over her shoulder at the well-dressed man waiting behind her. He checked his watch, sighed loudly, and shook his head as if Steven were wasting everyone's time. "We have a priority situation," the attendant replied. "This passenger requires the VIP seat." Steven nodded slowly. "And I don't." That question landed harder than he intended. The attendant avoided eye contact. "Sir, please don't make this difficult. Notice how fairness is never explained, only demanded. When power feels threatened, clarity disappears." A second staff member arrived, taller, more confident, clearly a supervisor. "What's the issue?" he asked. "She won't move," the attendant said, gesturing toward Steven. Steven corrected her gently. "I haven't refused. I'm just asking for a reason." The supervisor looked at Steven, then at the wealthy passenger. His decision came fast. "Sir," he said to Steven, "we'll reassign you another seat." Steven frowned slightly. "Is the other seat also VIP?" The supervisor paused. "No." "Then I don't understand," Steven replied calmly. "Why am I the one being moved?" The wealthy passenger finally spoke, loud enough for nearby rows to hear. "Look, I'm in a hurry," he said impatiently. "I paid good money. Let's not turn this into a whole thing." A few passengers exchanged looks. Steven turned toward him politely. "So did I." The man scoffed. "Yeah. You don't look like it." The words landed like a slap. The cabin fell quiet. This is the moment disrespect stops being subtle. When assumptions become statements. A woman across the aisle whispered, "That was uncalled for." Another passenger quietly lifted their phone. Stephen didn't respond immediately. He took a breath, slow, controlled. "I'm not here to compete," he said. "I just want what I paid for." The supervisor's tone hardened. "Sir, if you don't comply, we may have to involve security." Stephen looked him straight in the eye. "For asking a question?" The supervisor didn't answer. You think this is about rules, or about status? Comment rules or status below." The wealthy passenger smirked again, leaning comfortably against the seat as if the outcome was already decided. Stephen noticed something else now. No one was asking the rich man to wait. No one was checking his ticket. All the pressure was aimed in one direction. Power often reveals itself not by what it says, but by who it pressures. A young man a few rows back spoke up. "Why don't you move him instead?" The supervisor shot him a warning look. "Sir, please stay out of this." The cabin buzzed with tension. Stephen felt the familiar instinct, the one that told him he could end this instantly. But he didn't. Instead, he stayed seated. "Calm. Still. Respectful. I'm not trying to embarrass anyone," he said. "But I won't accept being treated as less than." The supervisor clenched his jaw. "This is your final warning." Stephen nodded once. "And this is my final question." He looked around the cabin, then back at the staff. "If I looked richer, would this conversation even be happening?" No one answered. Audience question: what would you do right now? Type stand if you'd stay seated. Type move if you'd avoid the conflict. The silence stretched. Then the supervisor reached for his radio. And that's when Stephen realized. They weren't trying to solve the problem anymore. They were trying to win. And the next decision would change everything. The supervisor's fingers rested on the radio for a moment longer than necessary. That pause said everything. Stephen noticed it. So did the passengers. "This doesn't need to go any further," Stephen said calmly. "We can resolve this like adults." The supervisor didn't respond. Instead, he spoke into the radio quietly, asking for assistance near the VIP section. A ripple of unease moved through the cabin. This is the moment many situations cross the line. Not because someone did something wrong, but because authority refuses to admit it might be. The wealthy passenger leaned back in his seat, arms crossed, watching the scene like entertainment. There was no concern on his face. No doubt. He looked like someone who had never been told no in public. Stephen glanced at him briefly, then looked away. He wasn't here to fight a man. He was standing against an idea. A flight attendant returned, this time with a firmer expression. "Sir," she said to Stephen, "you are delaying the flight." Stephen raised an eyebrow slightly. "By sitting in the seat I was assigned?" She ignored the question. Passengers nearby began whispering openly now. "This is ridiculous." "He's being calm. What's the issue?" "They wouldn't do this if he looked rich." Someone in the back said loudly, "Just let the man sit." "If you were on this flight, would you speak up or stay silent?" Comment speak or silent below. The supervisor turned toward the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated." But the damage was done. The situation was no longer private. And power hates witnesses. Stephen felt the weight of the moment. He could feel the stress rising in his chest, not fear, but disappointment. Not anger, but clarity. Some battles aren't about winning. They're about refusing to disappear. The supervisor faced Stephen again. "Sir, I'm asking you one last time. Please stand up." Stephen looked around the cabin slowly. He saw discomfort, curiosity, support, fear. Then he spoke. "I want to be very clear," he said calmly. "I am not causing trouble. I am not refusing instructions. I am asking for fairness." His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. "You asked me to move," he continued. "I asked why." No one answered. "Instead, I was pressured, insulted, and threatened." The wealthy passenger scoffed. "Oh, come on. You're making this dramatic. Stephen turned to him, calmly, firmly. With respect, Stephen said, you entered a seat that wasn't yours and assumed it would become yours. The man bristled. Do you know who I am? Stephen paused, then answered honestly. No. And it shouldn't matter. The cabin went silent again. When someone says, do you know who I am? What they're really asking is, why don't I matter more than you? The supervisor interrupted sharply. That's enough. Stephen nodded. I agree. It should have been enough when I showed my boarding pass. The supervisor clenched his jaw. Sir, if you do not comply, security will escort you off the plane. Gasps spread through the cabin. Off the plane. For sitting quietly. Stephen's heart sank, not for himself, but for what this represented. As this fair, or abuse of authority? Comment fair or abuse. Stephen stood up slowly. Not to surrender, but to speak eye to eye. I will leave this seat, he said. If you confirm, on record, that this decision has nothing to do with my appearance or status. The supervisor froze. He hadn't expected that. He began. You can't, Stephen continued gently. Because we all know the truth. A woman near the aisle spoke up, voice shaking but firm. He's right. Another followed. This is wrong. Phones were fully out now. The wealthy passenger shifted uncomfortably for the first time. Power feels strongest when people are silent, and weakest the moment they aren't. The supervisor took a step back, scanning the cabin, realizing control was slipping. At that moment, a voice came from the front of the plane. Excuse me. Everyone turned. A senior crew member had entered the cabin, calm, authoritative, observant. What seems to be the problem? He asked. The supervisor started explaining quickly, defensively. The senior crew member listened, then looked at Stephen. Sir, he said politely, may I see your boarding pass? Stephen handed it over. The man studied it. His expression changed, just slightly. Then he looked back up at Stephen's face. And his eyes widened. Just a little. Sometimes respect doesn't come from money. It comes from recognition. The senior crew member swallowed. Sir, he said slowly. The entire cabin held its breath. Because something had just shifted. And within the next few minutes, everyone would understand why this situation was never about a seat. To be continued. The senior crew member held Stephen's boarding pass a second longer than necessary. Then he looked up again. This time, really looked. His posture straightened. His expression softened, not with fear, but with sudden awareness. Sir, he said carefully, lowering his voice, may I ask you to remain seated for just a moment? The supervisor stiffened. What? The senior crew member didn't answer him. His attention stayed on Stephen. Stephen nodded calmly. Of course. The wealthy passenger frowned. What's going on now? The senior crew member ignored him and stepped slightly aside, whispering something into his earpiece. That's when the cabin felt it. Not relief. Not resolution. A shift. Sometimes power doesn't disappear suddenly. It leaks out slowly, the moment people realize they misjudged the situation. A woman in the second row leaned toward her husband. Why is he suddenly being polite? A man across the aisle whispered, did they finally check who he is? Phones remained raised, recording every breath. Stephen sat quietly, hands resting on his knees. He didn't smile. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The supervisor stepped closer to the senior crew member. We already explained the situation, he said, voice tight. This passenger is refusing to cooperate. The senior crew member turned to him, calm, firm. No, he said. He's been cooperating. You escalated. The words hit like a quiet slap. The supervisor opened his mouth, then closed it. Have you ever seen someone in authority suddenly change tone when they realize they're wrong? Comment yes or no. The wealthy passenger shifted again, irritation creeping into his voice. Is this going to take long? I have places to be. The senior crew member looked at him for the first time. Just a look. Nothing more. We're handling it, he said evenly. Not apologetic. Not submissive. Just neutral. Neutrality feels unfair to people who are used to privilege. A murmur ran through the cabin. Who is he? Why are they acting different now? I swear I recognize him. A young woman a few rows back gasped softly. Wait. That looks like... Her friend grabbed her arm. Don't say it out loud. Stephen heard the whispers. He kept his eyes forward. Because he already knew something important. The moment people recognize you, they stop listening to what you're saying and start rewriting how they treated you. That's why dignity matters most before recognition arrives. The senior crew member returned, this time with a tablet. He tapped quickly, then looked at the supervisor again. Why was this passenger selected to be moved? He asked. The supervisor hesitated. We had a priority request. A request? The senior crew member repeated. Or an assumption? Silence. The supervisor cleared his throat. The other passenger is a high-value customer. Stephen finally spoke, quietly, calmly. And I am not. No accusation. Just a question. The senior crew member met Stephen's eyes. Sir, he said, choosing his words carefully, your ticket is fully valid. Your seat assignment was correct. The cabin reacted instantly. A few people clapped before realizing it. Others nodded, relieved. Some looked furious, not at Stephen, but at the situation. Audience question: should this have been confirmed before he was embarrassed in public? Comment absolutely or no. The wealthy passenger stood up abruptly. So what? Are you saying I don't get the seat? The senior crew member looked at him calmly. I'm saying the seat was never yours. The man scoffed. Do you know how much I spend with this airline? The senior crew member didn't blink. Enough to know better. That line sent a quiet wave through the cabin. Stephen remained seated, still not celebrating. Winning without gloating is the hardest kind of strength. The supervisor swallowed hard now. Sweat beaded at his temple. Sir, he said to Stephen, suddenly polite, we apologize for the misunderstanding. Stephen looked up at him. I don't need an apology, he said. I need this not to happen to the next person. That sentence changed the room. A woman whispered, wow. Another passenger said softly, that's class. The senior crew member nodded slowly, respect clear in his eyes. Then someone finally said it, quietly, almost reverently. That's Steven Seagal. The name traveled fast. Row by row. Seat by seat. The wealthy passenger froze. The supervisor's face drained of color. Recognition doesn't create worth. It only exposes how unfairly worth was measured. Stephen felt the shift completely now, the sudden respect, the awkward politeness, the forced smiles. And he didn't like it. Because now the truth was undeniable. If no one had recognized him, this would have ended very differently. Does it bother you that respect only arrived after his identity was known? Type yes or no. The senior crew member took a breath. Sir, he said to Stephen, we need to have a conversation, immediately. Stephen nodded once. Not because he felt powerful, but because he felt responsible. Because what happened next wouldn't just decide a seat. It would decide consequences. And in the next few minutes, everything would come crashing down. The senior crew member gestured gently toward the front of the cabin. Sir, he said to Stephen, could you step forward with me for a moment? The supervisor flinched. Stephen stood calmly, smoothing his jacket. No rush. No anger. The wealthy passenger watched closely now, his confidence cracking for the first time. As Stephen walked forward, the cabin followed him in silence. Eyes, phones, attention. This is the moment authority fears most. Not rebellion, but calm accountability. Near the front, the senior crew member stopped and turned to face both Stephen and the supervisor. I want a clear explanation, he said evenly. Why was this passenger targeted? The supervisor swallowed. We were trying to accommodate a high-value customer. And to do that, the senior crew member asked, you publicly embarrassed another paying passenger? The supervisor didn't answer. Stephen spoke calmly. I don't want anyone punished unfairly. I just want honesty. That surprised everyone. True strength doesn't demand revenge. It demands responsibility. The wealthy passenger interrupted sharply. This is ridiculous. You're all overreacting. The senior crew member turned slowly. Sir, please remain seated. But This does not concern you anymore. The tone was unmistakable. The wealthy passenger sat down, stunned. Oh, you think the rich passenger should have been confronted earlier? Comment yes or no. The senior crew member turned back to the supervisor. Did you check this passenger's ticket before escalating? The supervisor hesitated. No, he admitted quietly. A murmur rolled through the cabin. And did any staff member insult or imply he didn't belong in VIP? The senior crew member continued. The supervisor's face burned red. It may have been implied. Stephen closed his eyes briefly. Most injustice isn't loud. It's hidden behind words like may have and implied. The senior crew member exhaled slowly, then tapped something on his tablet. I'm escalating this, he said. Immediately. The supervisor's eyes widened. Sir. No, the senior crew member cut in. This is no longer your decision. The supervisor stepped back. The wealthy passenger stood again. This airline is going to hear about this. The senior crew member met his gaze. They already are. That line landed hard. Have you ever seen someone lose power the moment accountability arrives? Type yes or no. Stephen looked around the cabin. Faces were watching, not hungry for drama, but for fairness. He spoke again, voice calm but firm. I want to say something, he said. Not as a celebrity. Not as anyone important. The senior crew member nodded. Stephen turned slightly so more passengers could hear. What happened here wasn't about a seat, Stephen said. It was about deciding who deserves respect, without asking questions. The cabin was completely silent. When someone is treated unfairly, he continued, and everyone stays quiet, that unfairness grows. A woman wiped her eyes. A man nodded slowly. This is why stories like this resonate. Because everyone has been on one side of this moment. The senior crew member spoke again. Sir, thank you. Then he turned to the supervisor. You and the staff involved will be removed from this flight pending investigation. The words hit like thunder. The supervisor's knees nearly buckled. You're suspending us? He asked. Yes, the senior crew member replied. Effective immediately. Gasps echoed. The wealthy passenger looked around wildly. You can't be serious. I am, the senior crew member said. And sir, you will be returning to your assigned seat. But this discussion is over. Privilege collapses quickly when rules are finally applied equally. Stephen didn't smile. He didn't nod in victory. He simply returned to his seat. Passengers watched him pass. Some clapped quietly, others whispered words of respect. Thank you. That took courage. You handled that with class. Stephen sat down, looking out the window. Oh, you think Stephen handled this the right way? Calm instead of aggressive? Comment calm or loud. The senior crew member made an announcement moments later. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We are resolving an internal matter and will depart shortly. Internal matter. Stephen almost smiled at that phrasing. Systems always minimize the moment they're exposed. As new staff boarded, the wealthy passenger avoided eye contact. His confidence was gone. The supervisor and staff were escorted off quietly. No shouting, no scene. Just consequences. Stephen leaned back in his seat. But his expression wasn't victorious. It was thoughtful. Because he knew something the cabin didn't yet realize. This story wasn't about him. It was about what happens when ordinary people are treated unfairly. And no one famous is there to stop it. Audience question: do you think the staff deserve to be fired, or should there have been another outcome? Comment fired or second chance. As the plane prepared for takeoff, phones buzzed. Videos were already spreading. And within minutes, this moment would no longer belong to the cabin. It would belong to the world. And the aftermath would be even bigger than anyone expected. By the time the plane finally pushed back from the gate, the story had already escaped the cabin. Phones buzzed non-stop. Short clips. Whispers turned captions. Anger compressed into 30 seconds of video. Stephen didn't know it yet, but millions of people were already watching. In today's world, injustice doesn't stay private. It travels faster than apologies ever do. As the plane lifted into the air, passengers refreshed their screens. Have you seen this? It's everywhere. That's the guy from our flight. Stephen remained quiet, eyes forward, hands folded. He wasn't scrolling. He wasn't reading comments. Because he understood something most people don't. Once the internet decides you're guilty or worthy, you no longer control the story. The senior crew member returned briefly to Stephen's seat. "Sir," he said quietly, "corporate has been notified." Stephen nodded. "Good. That's all you have to say?" the man asked, surprised. Stephen answered honestly. "That's all that matters. People who stand on principle don't need public validation." A few rows back, the wealthy passenger stared at his phone, his jaw clenched. "What are they saying?" someone whispered. "They're calling him out," another replied. "Hard." For the first time, the man looked small. Audience question: do you think public accountability is fair, or does it go too far sometimes? Comment fair or too much. By the time the plane landed, the airline's name was trending. So was Stephen's. Headlines popped up fast. VIP passenger removed after status bias. Witnesses speak out on in-flight discrimination. Video shows calm passenger standing against privilege. The comments were brutal. Not toward Stephen, but toward the system. People aren't angry because one man was disrespected. They're angry because they've been him. At the terminal, executives were already waiting. Not smiling. Not panicking. Calculating. The senior crew member briefed them quickly as passengers disembarked. Stephen walked past quietly, unnoticed by most, until a woman stopped him. "Thank you," she said softly, "for saying what most of us can't." Stephen nodded. "Just keep saying it when you can." That moment didn't go viral. But it mattered more than the rest. Change doesn't start with hashtags. It starts with people feeling seen. Behind closed doors, the airline moved fast. Too fast. A corporate statement was drafted within the hour. "We regret the incident and are conducting a full internal review." But the internet wasn't satisfied. Videos showed the humiliation. The silence. The pressure. Words couldn't erase that. Do apologies mean anything without consequences? Comment yes or no. By evening, another update appeared. Staff members involved in the incident were terminated. The wealthy passenger's loyalty status? Revoked. The airline promised mandatory retraining and policy changes. The story exploded again. Some people cheered. Others hesitated. Accountability always divides people. Not because it's wrong, but because it's uncomfortable. Stephen finally saw the headlines that night. He didn't celebrate. He didn't repost. He didn't comment. Instead, he turned off his phone. Because he knew something most people online didn't. Firing people doesn't fix culture. Only awareness does. Audience question: did the staff deserve to be fired, or should the system have been fixed instead? Type fired or fix system. The next morning, Stephen was asked for a public response. He declined interviews. Then, quietly, he posted a single sentence online. Respect shouldn't depend on recognition. That post reached millions. And for once, the comments weren't angry. They were thoughtful. Stories poured in. People sharing moments they were ignored. Talked down to. Moved aside. That's how you know a story touched something real. The airline announced new measures days later. Not because they wanted to, but because they had to. Stephen moved on. No victory lap. No speeches. Just a lesson left behind. Because the real impact wasn't the staff losing their jobs. It was millions of people realizing something quietly powerful. They weren't imagining the disrespect. If you were Stephen, would you have spoken publicly, or stayed silent afterward? Comment, speak, or silent. The story slowly faded from trending pages. But it didn't disappear. Because moments like this don't vanish. They wait. For the next person. The next place. The next time someone is told they don't belong. And in one final moment would reveal why Stephen believed this was never about him at all. A few days later, the noise began to fade. New stories replaced old ones. Another trend. Another outrage. But for the people on that plane, and for millions who watched quietly, something had shifted. Steven Seagal sat alone at home, the city humming outside his window. No cameras. No interviews. Just silence. He replayed the moment in his head. Not the confrontation, not the recognition, but the exact second when the flight attendant first asked him to stand. Not rude. Not loud. Just certain. That's how most people experience injustice. Not as a dramatic explosion, but as a quiet erasure. Stephen knew something important. If no one had recognized him, if no phones had been recording, if the senior crew member hadn't stepped in, he would have been removed. And no one would have cared. That thought stayed with him. A message request popped up on his phone. Then another. And another. People from all over the world were writing to him. A nurse who said she was spoken down to every day. A construction worker who was removed from a restaurant because of how he looked. A student who said, "I thought it was just me." Stephen read them slowly. When people see their experience reflected in someone else's story, they finally feel sane. One message stood out. "Thank you for staying calm. You showed me that dignity is still an option." Stephen set the phone down. That was the reason. Not fame. Not attention. Not consequences. Dignity. Oh, you think staying calm is harder than getting angry in moments like this? Comment yes or no. Later that week, Stephen was invited to a private meeting with the airline's leadership. No press. No announcements. Just conversation. They apologized again. More carefully this time. Stephen listened. Then he said something unexpected. "I don't want compensation," he said. "I don't want a lifetime upgrade." They looked confused. "I want you to train your staff to question their assumptions," he continued. "Because the next person won't be me." The room went quiet. Real accountability isn't about punishment. It's about preventing repetition. As Stephen left the meeting, one executive stopped him. "You could have destroyed us," the man said. "Why didn't you?" Stephen answered honestly. "Because most systems don't need to be destroyed," he said. "They need to be confronted." That sentence never made headlines. But it mattered. Do you believe change comes more from confrontation or cancellation? Comment, confront, or cancel. Weeks later, the story resurfaced one last time, not because of outrage, but because of impact. The airline announced measurable policy changes. Training videos. Clearer procedures. Real accountability checks. Not perfect, but better. Stephen never commented again, because he believed something deeply. If a message is true, it doesn't need repetition. The strongest statements are the ones that don't beg to be heard. On another flight months later, Stephen watched a young man being treated dismissively by staff. Not aggressively, just less. Stephen didn't intervene immediately. He waited. Then he saw something different. Another passenger spoke up. Politely. Firmly. And the staff corrected themselves. Stephen smiled. Just a little. Because that was the real ending. Change doesn't look like applause. It looks like behavior adjusting when no one important is watching. As the plane took off, Stephen looked out the window again. The VIP seat didn't matter. The firing didn't matter. What mattered was this. For once, someone stood their ground. Not with fists. Not with fame. But with calm. And millions remembered it. Final audience question: if this happened to you tomorrow, would you speak up or stay quiet? Comment speak up or stay quiet. Because respect shouldn't depend on who you are, or how much you have, or whether someone recognizes your name. It should be automatic. And if you believe that too, type respect in the comments. And subscribe for more powerful stories that remind us who we should be, even when no one's watching. Speech balloon.